G'day, mate, and welcome to the first ever Saturday Satisfactory blog. And I've got Mojo here with me. Hey, mate.
Hello.
We're both old school at doing the Factorio Friday Facts, and we decided with the Satisfactory doing a blog post, it needs to be covered because it actually took me a while to hunt down and find the damn thing.
Yeah, they kind of hit it. I didn't even know they were doing blog posts.
It was posted on Twitter, and I didn't find out about it till like 5 days after it had been posted, because I finally went to Twitter and went browsing and saw it.
I didn't even see it. I mean, this is already over a week old now, too.
It is. We looked at doing it last weekend. It just didn't happen. So, yeah. Now, being a once a month, once every almost 3 months blog post, it's dense. I will warn everybody, it's really dense. The Factorio has been doing this for, 3 years?
Since 2013, I think.
6 years. 6 years. So they've got a really fine art to it. It's short. It's concise. This is not. This is a little bit long, a little bit in depth. I'd like to see more of them more often with less crap in them. But yeah, this is all about the network optimizations, which was in the last big patch, which made one hell of a difference to the overall gameplay. Both multiplayer and I found big changes in single player as well. Did you see the same?
Yeah, there was a lot. There's actually a lot of things in here that I didn't even realize was going on.
Yeah, and because we're both old school at reading the Friday Facts on Factorio, we understand a lot of the guts and how this works and how it differs from Factorio.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting seeing how their approach differs from Factorio.
Yeah, so we're going to get into the guts of this. So, as you know, the problem with Satisfactory, probably know Satisfactory is a game of managing and handling buildings and resources. This creates a very unique problem that most multiplayer players don't have to handle, as multiplayer games only need to keep track of about 100 players and what comes out the other end of their gun, which is why I don't play those sorts of games. Which is very different from a base with over 2,000 conveyors transporting thousands of items every second. It really matters whether things move the way you expect, as opposed to one of those games with 100 other people and a gun, where if the aim is 10 degrees wrong, you really won't notice, let's be honest. And we can see here a spaghetti base that would probably even put Mojo's spaghetti to shame, maybe?
I could do a better job.
You could do a better job, yeah.
I mean, this has stacked everything vertically. I see no reason to do that.
Okay. I saw your spaghetti. It was impressive. Quite impressive.
It was a work of art, that's what it was.
And clipping was perfectly allowed, right?
Yeah, it was perfectly allowed. It was, the screws had to go through the plate. Couldn't go around it or over it or under it. Had to go through it.
If the game allowed it, you went with it. Yep.
I just did it by accident one day, and it was like, yeah, I'm just going with it.
Yeah. So, the solutions that they came up with to solve this are essentially two solutions. Solution A would be initially synchronize the whole map to all clients fully and then do a local simulation of all clients' machines. This will keep everything 100% predictable at all times. Only need to send and sync information when unpredictable events such as player input happen, which is exactly what Factorio does.
I was going to say, gee, it sounds awful familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's literally what Factorio does. You get a whole copy of the whole map when you first join a multiplayer game, and then from that moment on, everything happens in Lockstep. Well,
yeah, everybody knows what everybody else is doing.
Yeah.
And it works for them because it's a 2D top-down style game, and that's pretty much how all those games work.
Well, I think in a fundamental coding thing, that's how the game was designed from square one. And
yeah, it was intended to be that way.
And because Factorio wrote their engine, whereas Satisfactory's taken like Unreal Engine off the shelf, which has a lot of cool things written in it, but is maybe not designed to be lockstep right from square one. They have a certain amount of limitations that they inherently run into.
Fundamentally, I suspect that the Unreal Engine is made for FPSs.
Yeah,
so that's
first-person
what
shooters and your gun being off by 10 degrees, nobody cares.
Yeah. And it's meant to be having people having enemy characters in a reasonably predictable position.
Yeah.
And, it's meant for that sort of arrangement.
Yeah. So their other solution would be run everything on a server while clients send their input to the server, which would then replicate the state to all clients, which is exactly how the shooters handle things.
Yeah, it's pretty much how every shooter works.
Yeah, it's how a lot of games actually run. There's very, very few games that run in Lockstep nowadays.
Yeah, just because you don't really get 2D tile-based games like Factorio anymore. It's sort of because Lockstep used to be the de facto standard, like it was the standard.
It was,
for most
but
games.
I'm thinking about RTS games. Like RTS games, a lot of them run in Lockstep as well.
Yeah, they all run in Lockstep, and that's actually why I say it's not really a thing anymore, because it's not as apparent anymore, because there's not as many RTS games there used to be.
No, RTS is one of those dying genres, which is a bit of a shame.
Yep, that's a whole other topic in itself that's come up in the last few years. RTS is dying. Admittedly, they're dying because Command and Conquer and Dune 2000 kind of kickstarted it.
Yeah, and they kickstarted a long time ago. Look, we're on a tangent already. You guys just, if you're here every week, get used to it. Well, every couple of months when they do a new blog post, get used to it. We go off on tangents. It's part of the charm. So solution A is everything syncs locally, as is Factorio, and then everything stays in Lockstep, and it's predictable and deterministic. To keep things deterministic for factories is one thing, but keeping the physics simulation of complex actors such as vehicles perfectly deterministic on all clients is really hard, if not impossible, without rerunning parts of the games. And we spoke about this beforehand with the old PhysX cards before they
good old cards. Yes.
Incorporated on GPUs. And I don't remember any games from that era that played multiplayer as soon as you had a PhysX card installed. I
don't remember any games that really supported it and demonstrated any meaningful benefit.
Yeah,
because the one thing I remember about it the most was that most people had a lot of hard times justifying exactly what the hell it did. What were physics?
Yeah, what the hell it did, and what was the point, and why was it so expensive, and then it got bought up by, I want to say, NVIDIA?
It was NVIDIA, yes. And it became part of, they integrated it into their CUDA core.
Yeah,
that was how they implemented it.
Part of the GPU, and it's just become one of those things that we just all have now and don't even realize.
It's actually kind of funny that you can't actually modern cards can't, NVIDIA cards can't simulate it.
Oh, can't they?
No,
okay.
What is it? Mafia 2 tanks to like it could run at 300 frames per second, but it tanks to like 25 if you try and turn PhysX on.
Oh, really?
Mafia 2? I think it was Mafia 2. It's because the old implementation isn't supported anymore.
Oh.
Or their implementation.
Okay.
Anyway.
So there you go. Yeah, more tangents. So what makes this even more complicated is sending and syncing information when unpredictable events such as player input happen. To make this work, you also have to run everything in Lockstep. Now, Lockstep we're going to cover a little bit more later, but it basically means that every single PC is running the exact same copy of the exact same game at all times, and when I perform an input, every other machine that's connected to the same multiplayer game has to perform the exact same input, which is awkward to say the least. It can be done. Factorio does it, but it's
it can be done. The result of this is Factorio card.
The result of this is
kind of what it leads to.
Yeah. So an alternative to Lockstep is players keep multiple copies of the game for every frame up until 2 seconds back in time. This enables them to rewind and simulate forward again when the input comes from a laggy client, which is one of the things Factorio actually sort of does and sort of simulates. That was covered recently with the Mega Packet. Whilst rewinding and simulating forward multiple frames in a single frame would cause a lot of CPU overhead and potentially performance spikes. And I think that
could then have a reflective effect on the laggy client.
Yeah, that could make everything worse for every other client, and also get yourself in a runaway situation where the laggy client gets further and further behind. It's one of those things that Satisfactory, when it first released, the specs weren't that high for the game, but I have to say, since upgrading my PC, I noticed there's a really big difference between just running the game and running something larger in the game. Having a bigger and better CPU has made a big difference. So yeah, having multiple copies potentially running that I could rewind and simulate forward could be really, really bad for Satisfactory.
Yeah.
So that's why they didn't go with that method. They went for solution B, which runs everything on a server. But it does require them to be really, really smart with how they use the available bandwidth, since replicating everything straight up would be impossible with a game like this, which I fully agree. There is no way that... We played multiplayer when the game first came out, and we had a lot of...
yeah, that was very all over the place.
It had some...
duplicating player characters and...
and you got to remember when you shot me with a rebar gun, and I went flying off on your screen, and on my screen nothing happened.
yeah.
Yeah, it led to some interesting situation. So, in the months since launch, they've been working on minimizing what data is sent, figuring out when data is actually needed and only setting it at that time. Things the player don't notice are not needed. Reducing how often the data is actually sent, so things don't change often or are more predictable, and it can be sent less often. And compressing, minimizing the amount of data needs to represent a game state. So they've also... One of the other problems they had is they were evaluating all the objects separately for each client on the server PC, which is the data was prioritized and would be... What data was prioritized and needed for each client would be different every single time. Which meant the server had a lot more work to go through, which meant a greater CPU load, which again, we noticed when we were doing multiplayer early on, that, the server took a pounding.
Even my PC performed noticeably worse in multiplayer.
When it first released, the funny thing is, since then, I've done a 16-player multiplayer without an issue.
And it's funny because we had, 2 to 3 to maximum 4 people with
players.
A tiny little database, which was only, tier 3 tech?
Tier 3, yeah, I think we didn't get as far as Steel, because I don't think that was
Steel wasn't in the game.
Yeah, it wasn't in there.
That was the bottleneck at the time, and I was dropping below 60 frames by then.
Yeah.
Well below, I think it was down in the 40s.
And I've done 16 players with everything up to oil with the worst makeshift base by 16 different people, and not an issue. Not an issue at all. And as the guys said over here on the blog, if things are not done properly, the server can be performing a lot worse than the clients. The clients can experience a lot of extra latency, which may be greater than the actual ping. And then we've got the terms, and I'm going to accept that most people know the terms. If not, pause the video now, read through them. The only ones I want to cover is the send buffer, a chunk of memory that is written to when the PC will... which the PC will read from and consume when sending packets, a bloat buffer, when too much data is written to the buffer, making it too long to consume and work through the data. Think of it like a queue. Sometimes this leads to extreme latency increase, and a buffer overflow, when you try to write too much data to a buffer and some of it doesn't fit and actually gets dropped, can result in what seems like dropped packets. We're going to need those terms coming up. So...
Buffer bloat is a discussion in its own right too.
Yeah, it's bad. So what have we done? They had a pretty big plate of things to fix. There are many issues with the netcode at launch, resulting in all kinds of issues imaginable. Funnily enough, they didn't actually have multiplayer till about 3 weeks before the early access launch. It just wasn't fully running, even for alpha players. So it was sort of rushed into fairly late in the process, and they got it working. None of us can disagree that it didn't work. It just didn't work well.
Yeah, it was passable for the launch.
Yeah, and it's been much improved since. And the last couple of updates have made really big differences to it.
Actually, in saying that, it actually surprised me that that it was running so late in the play. I thought they had it going a lot sooner.
No, they got it running. Maybe they had it running and not enabled, and therefore nobody had played with it, and therefore had bug reports on it. But no, even early alpha players, to my knowledge, didn't have multiplayer till about a month before launch.
May have switched it off for the alpha players.
Maybe. So yeah, they've done a lot of fixes. They do have plans to follow up on some of these fixes again. So the biggest problem they had was the sheer amount of raw data that was necessary to be sent, growing larger as the factory grew. Large bases and factories would cause an always full send buffer, meaning buffer bloat, and even worse, possibly causing overflow. So bad to worse to horrible with a big factory, which I'm pretty sure I encountered in the first initial release when I tried doing multiplayer, and bad things happened. So buffer bloat for the game, think of the buffer queue, and the data needs to go through it before it's actually sent. So a full or long buffer means that data has to wait around for longer before it's actually sent. Ideally, a responsive game should write as little data as possible so it's all consumed before the next update. So ideally, we get that data out and to the other clients as fast as possible. And it means new packets can start writing at the start of the buffer, i.e. a queue, rather than at the very, very end. And it means that the data is written and sent as fast as possible. It means a smooth gameplay experience, which is what we all really care about. So the number one goal was to reduce the amount of data being sent during gameplay. And we're going to go into two cases two different examples below. And what they had to be done and what they did do. And there's a lot of work that went into this.
Oh yeah, this is it sounds very trivial, but it's actually a non-trivial thing to implement.
Yeah, netcode is one of those things that a lot of devs hate doing, but it makes such a difference to any sort of multiplayer experience.
Yeah, it's where the big money is too.
Oh, is it? Okay. I'll remember that if I ever go into programming. Make sure I know my netcode.
As soon as you get into programming, just get straight into what is it? Call of Duty, I think their netcodes, as I've heard, is their network programming is like top tier.
Oh, okay.
Top of industry. I might be misquoting. Like I might be getting that wrong. That's only what I've heard.
Okay.
I mean, for all the things that are said about it, they apparently are.
They got the netcode right. That's at least they got one thing going for them. Yeah. So low-hanging fruit is always where you start. So all the factories and buildings with inventories. With the initial replication, the whole building was seen as one object, meaning if we replicated any part of it, like the stupid lamp that sits on top of it, they need to replicate all of it, which meant they had to replicate not only what the building was doing, but their actual inventory at all times, which sounds like a really bad idea.
It's actually interesting that they even replicated the lamp as well. Even replicated state. They didn't because they're not in Lockstep. They don't need to synchronize the lamp. It's purely visual.
It is purely visual, but like if I went to if you had a whole bunch of constructors on one level and they've all got green lights on them, but they're not outputting, then I would guess there would be a problem, and I'd hate to have to go to each machine to open them up to get that inventory, to get that state to sync, to then go, okay, they're actually meant to be yellow because the belts are backed up or they have no input or whatever it happens to be. But the fact that the lamp was part of the whole assembler machine means they had to sync the whole thing rather than just syncing just the lamp, which is all that players care about. It's the visual part.
Although it depends what they mean by simulating the indicator lamp. Do they mean simulating the state of it, or do they mean simulating the state of with the lights on or off and what color it is at any one point?
I imagine it'd be the color of the light and whether it's on or off, i.e. has power, whether it's doing something, whether it's backed up, whether the inputs are wrong, whether it doesn't have a recipe set, because it is an indicator lamp. It's one of those those graphical cues for players to see what's actually happening. But yeah, it meant for stuff like storage containers. And we've got this pretty little GIF here.
This diagram here.
That's constantly changing its inventory because we've got items flowing in and items flowing out at the exact same speed, but that's a lot of data that you have to send from server to client or server to client, which is costly.
And that's where they're leading into here, is because this is this is one of their low-hanging fruit, is that if you're not looking at that inventory, why do you need to know about what's inside it?
Yep.
Why send that data at all?
Well, that's exactly. They stopped sending it, but it also meant that there was a small chance that there would be a building or an inventory or a storage container that when a client went up and opened it, the client hadn't received the inventory yet, so the client couldn't see what was happening. So they need to be aware of that, and also hopefully inform players, but also at the same time sort of account for that. But doing this small change also decreased CPU time by a lot. And also meant that they only had to look at... They're aiming the game for 4-player multiplayer. So it meant that decreased. They could potentially say, okay, we can use up to 4 times that amount of CPU for 4 players. That's a huge gain. As I said, I've unlocked the ini file and gone up to 16 players without too much issues, It's about as stable as normal Satisfactory multiplayer is. People drop randomly for no reason whatsoever, but they can rejoin and everything continues as is. You do get a few random bodies floating around, but that's a separate feature entirely.
It's nothing like first launch where there was 20 or 30 bodies floating in the air at one point in the end.
Yeah. I think I got a video of me wandering around shooting floating bodies. Yeah. There is a trade-off. As I mentioned, the inventory might not be there when you first show up to view it. But if we keep the buffer bloat to an absolute minimum and you're playing on a decent ping, it should show up fairly quickly, if not instantly. They are hoping in the future they can pre-fetch the inventory data, trying to predict where you might be going to, which is what a lot of games do. They just guess and download. Even Chrome does it now. It's going to guess what web pages you might visit from the page you're at and pre-caches them. Satisfactory could do the same thing. Just take a blind
proximity.
Guess. Yeah, look, simple proximity around you and just take a guess at what you might go look at. And in theory, as long as there's very, very little in the buffer, they could just send it as a low priority packet. And if you get it, awesome. If you happen to use it, great. If you don't, it was a bit of wasted data. It's no real major cost if it's sent as a low priority packet, that if we have enough room in the buffer situation.
It actually reminded me of Minecraft, where when there was a high latency and you open a chest, you just stand there and nothing would happen, and then suddenly the chest would, as it downloaded the inventory.
Yeah.
Or as it loaded the inventory in.
Yeah, lots of games have done it over the past, and Satisfactory looks like it's going to be another one in the club. So the other thing they need to do is they need to minimize the data size and rate by figuring out what actual data was needed rather than just sending everything. So the conveyor belts are literally thousands of items on them, and they send and receive many items per second. Often you can see them clearly with all the items at great distance. There is no need to send them... Well, there's no avoiding sending that data because everything's invisible, unlike in the inventory, so they need another solution. Where are we? So, they changed it over to a small set of changes. So, they're really looking for... Yeah, there's a certain amount of items on the conveyor, say 25, and they only send, hey, new 2 items went onto the conveyor and 1 item left since the last update. So rather than sending every single item on the conveyor, they're only sending 12% of the same amount of data for the exact same result. It does actually come with a bit of a catch that maybe the positioning on the belt might be slightly different between server and client. But it cuts down on the total amount of data by a massive amount, and potentially gets rid of the buffer getting bloated.
Yeah, which is, again, a good saving that you want. It's actually interesting because they say that the position might not be exact, but it's, unless you're grabbing something from the belt, it really doesn't matter. And
it really doesn't matter.
And the server is never going to, if it's different between the client and server, they're probably never going to notice. So you're only going to notice if you need to grab it.
Well, look, items are tend to move so fast, it's probably not going to matter even then. Okay, it would probably matter with a very, very empty belt if people were grabbing things by hand. But a reasonably full belt, it wouldn't really matter that much. And again, you'd probably only notice it if you're playing on a LAN scenario with two players beside one another, where I can lean over and look at the other person's screen and say, "Oh, look, my bit on my belt's like at the start of the belt, and yours at the end of the belt." That's obviously a bug. But realistically, you wouldn't see it.
What is it? It's a terrible game. 2 out of 10 uninstall. The items on the belt don't perfectly line up.
Yeah, yup. So yeah, they want to minimize the amount of data being sent, but always using more data gives better accuracy. So the trick is to find a line where you can just get just enough accuracy for as little data as possible. So they are also using formulas, I guess, to try and exact where the items are on the belt to keep them similar, if not exactly perfect server to client. But then again, after an item moves off one belt segment, so that's a belt segment from machine to machine, or machine to box, or even machine to a conveyor belt stacker, and then it goes to a new belt. When it reaches the end of that first belt, it gets deleted and then added to the new belt. So we're only talking over a distance of 6 times 8 meters, whatever that is, before 48. Before an item exactly gets deleted and then moved on to the next belt, and therefore it should sync up server and client to be in the exact right position.
I always wondered how multiple belt segments worked. Like if you join multiple segments together, whether it converted them into one long line or if it actually handed them off to each other.
It hands them off to one another, and you can tell that by being very, very far away, and you'll see them load in low res. And if you've got a gap on the belt, you'll see things will start sliding into a void at the end of one belt, and you'll get a half item on the belt.
Oh yeah, where it does when you get to the end of the render distance, where it starts rendering at once every 15 frames or so, or once every 60.
Yeah, so
every 30 frames or 60 frames.
It does a weird rendering thing to save on rendering data, and that's why I'm willing to bet it handles lots of little belt segments. Maybe it would be more efficient to handle it as one long belt segment.
It was an optimization that I'd always been wondering whether you try and minimize the number of individual belt segments as much as for that reason.
Well, we know with Factorio, with the belt updates they did for 16, that they treated up to 200 pieces of belt as one long segment, whereas prior to that, it was cut up very, very differently. So maybe
it was per tile.
Yeah.
Before that.
So maybe it's something Satisfactory can look at in the future, where they can, if you run a belt into, a conveyor, into any sort of stand, into another belt, that maybe that can become one giant long belt segment. At which point, you just got to say that the belt's 300 meters long now, and the item can move from one end to the other without ever having to, without having to have these updates for items removed and added per belt segment. It's now a 300 meter long belt segment, so it's a lot further, a lot less updates. In theory,
could be it would be a potential optimization, but I think there's still a little ways off it. Yeah, there's a lot because the way optimization goes, you always go for the easiest thing first.
You go with
that'll be something that's a little bit higher up.
Yeah, you go with the stuff that's easy to get first, and then as the game gets closer and closer to final release, that's when you go through the big optimizations and do big changes. They also reduce how often a conveyor tries to send an update to just 3 times a second compared to the previous over 20 times a second, which makes a big difference. And it means they accumulate more changes as one packet, meaning they send less data. And we've got a lovely before and after graph. And I remember the before. I remember streaming at 4 megabits up and 4 megabits being used by Satisfactory, just doing a 2-player, 3-player multiplayer, to afterwards, I do 16 players and don't even notice it.
It's a significant chunk of overhead being reduced there.
Yeah. So, and this is the optimization part. So a lot of these optimization things are things where I do by knowing the problem area in depth and designing everything specifically for the case at this case and this case only. In general, data optimizations like this manual work will take a lot of time and generally done at the end of a project when the problem area is well defined and tested. Overall, the new system is a lot cheaper on both the network as well as the CPU, whilst looking and feeling better than before. Essentially wins all around. So what's next? Thankfully, this is all the optimization talk we're going to have in this particular blog post. But there's a lot more work that they need to do. They spend a few more weeks after this current update looking at their systems to make sure everything's running as it should and release an update that they actually rolled back since this blog post came out and then re-rolled back out because it had a few bugs. But yeah, if you're still experiencing lag and delays and other issues when joining a game with a large factory, know that it is being looked at. That's one of the things that I haven't experienced, but people joining my factory do experience, because I have everything built right outside the hub, which is where most people build their whole factory.
As you tend to.
Yeah, I have people that can load in. They have to take 3 or 4 attempts to load in the multiplayer game before the world actually shows up, just because there's so much data right outside the door.
Yeah, and then the CPU has to try and finish synchronizing with the map and load in all this at the same time.
Yeah, so if you're having a problem, as a test case, maybe move your hub further away from like where your factory is and see if that helps people load in, because then as they get closer, it'll slowly synchronize more data to them rather than everything at once. It's all related to data floods and send buffer and creates a prolonged time of buffer bloat and overflow on startup. There is no easy way to manage this in the engine, so if you move your hub, maybe it'll work. They have to write their own system for gradual streaming of initial world state to clients, which is, I know in itself, a big task.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah. But the startup and loading is next on their list in the way of big optimization. So again, it's something we're waiting to see. Hopefully it'll come out like reasonably soon.
Hopefully.
But I know like what they set out with at sort of early access launch, they knew they were going to have, you know, explosives and sulfur and all this sort of stuff, and the new chains and nuclear were coming. And they've sort of gone through all the things that they had planned to release. And they had like, what was it? I think it was a 1 month cycle for one update and another, and the next one was another month away. So I'm expecting they're on like a quarterly update cycle now, especially from the last interview I did with Jace. So yeah, I'm expecting no major updates for probably a quarter. So after 3 months, you know, maybe around about the August, September. We'll see.
It was already a quarter when they were doing it was about a quarter, wasn't it, between the trains and the steel up?
Maybe, was it?
It was about 3 months.
Okay, maybe it was 3 months.
April to June? Or was it March to June?
No, you had an April update, they had a May update, they had a June update.
The May update wasn't the major content update though.
It was the April update that slipped to May. And then May update got slipped to June. Right. Yeah, it was once a month.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. The train one was meant to be May, wasn't it? And then it slipped.
Yeah.
Slide.
Yeah, so they've noticed they're not going to do network optimizations again for a while. They've noticed the biggest issue for running smooth multiplayer in large factories is not the network traffic anymore. It's rather the general performance of the PC acting as the server, which is something I've found in my own personal base. That's why I've had to rearrange my base. That and Hannah went and pathed a Mothra through the middle of it. I've had to move. Yeah, tell me about it. I've had to move my whole base because if I look at it, I go from 60 FPS down to 15 FPS. The trick is don't look at it and everything's fine.
That's what building it inside buildings really helps with.
Well, I put up a wall that only covers half it so far, and I'm getting about an extra 5 FPS.
Okay,
so
something out of it.
I need to keep
haven't
walling.
really encountered enough of a performance problem. Admittedly, I haven't built really, really big bases yet, like the same scale as some other people have.
Yeah,
what you've done.
I built really, really big, and then I made the mistake of putting triple conveyor walls around the whole thing so I could get light into it so I could see what I was doing. The catch is, if I have light going in, it means I can see in. If I can see in, it needs to render it. If it has to render it, it tanks the PC. So, yeah, lesson learned. If you can't see it, it works better. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this update. Go exploit the planet, build those factories, break the game, and tell them about it so they can patch it.
Yeah, don't break the game without telling them about it.
Yeah, that's important. They need to know what you broke so you can go fix it.
Yeah.
That's a really important part of Satisfactory. It's actually one of the things I love, that they do have a very, very messy, I don't know, bug reporting system on their, I can't remember what the webpage is called. It's blanked me. Maybe it'll be down in the description below. But it's very, very messy, but it's at the same time, like, everybody upvotes bugs that they've seen before, so that the ones that lots of people see get pushed to the top of the list, and they do get fixed fairly quickly.
And they can prioritize the ones that people are seeing a lot.
Yeah, on top of that, they also take feature requests the same way. So if things get lots of upvotes, then they get added to the system. We had a couple, like conveyor splitters and mergers, being stackable was way up on the list, and they got added in the last update because lots of people requested it. So yeah, it's an interesting way of like crowdsourcing all the bugs and everything and feature requests in one spot, but it works. Anyway, I think that's it for Saturday Satisfactory blog.
Yep.
Better name required.
Through everything. It's a lot of dense networking going on in.
There is.
I made it through it.
There is. We made it through it. We'll see you guys for the next one, whenever that's going to be. Like I said right at the start, I'd like to see these more often with less in them.
Yeah.
And I'd like a better name. So if you've got a better name for Saturday Satisfactory blog, by all means, post it down in the comments below. All right, I'm out. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. All right, bye.
Bye.